Jack Thompson had always lived a quiet, peaceful life on his sprawling 15,000-acre ranch in the heart of Montana. The land wasn't just property to him, it was his family's legacy. For generations, the Thompsons had worked hard to maintain the ranch, nurturing its fields, streams, and forests. It was more than just dirt and trees. It was home. Every sunrise brought with it the promise of another day spent caring for the animals, tending to crops, or simply enjoying the breathtaking views that stretched as far as the eye could see. But little did Jack know, this tranquil existence would soon be shattered by forces beyond his control. The trouble began when a group of developers moved into the area. They came with big plans, luxury housing subdivisions, golf courses, shopping centers, all designed to transform the once quiet countryside into a bustling suburban paradise. To make their vision a reality, they formed a homeowners association, HOA, an organization meant to oversee community rules and ensure uniformity among residents. At first, Jack paid little attention to the HOA. He figured their focus would be on the newer neighborhoods springing up nearby. After all, his ranch was miles away from those developments. What did he have to worry about? But then the letters started arriving. Official-looking documents filled with legal jargon urged Jack to join the HOA and comply with their regulations. At first, he ignored them, thinking it was some sort of mistake. His ranch predated the HOA by decades, so why should he suddenly have to answer to them? However, the letters kept coming, each one more insistent than the last. Soon, representatives from the HOA began showing up at his door, pressuring him to sign agreements and pay membership fees. They claimed that everyone in the region needed to contribute to the greater good of the community. Jack politely declined every time, explaining that his land had been in his family for generations and that he had no interest in joining their organization. As months passed, the pressure mounted. The HOA grew increasingly aggressive, accusing Jack of being uncooperative and a threat to progress. They argued that his refusal to join undermined their efforts to create a cohesive, modern community. Jack tried to reason with them, but it quickly became clear that compromise wasn't part of their agenda. Instead of backing down, the HOA escalated their tactics. Fines piled up in Jack's mailbox, penalties for supposed violations he knew nothing about. Some days he found surveyors trespassing on his property, marking boundaries and taking measurements without permission. Each intrusion felt like a violation, not just of his privacy, but of everything his family had built over the years. Despite the mounting tension, Jack remained hopeful that common sense would prevail. Surely the law would protect him from such blatant harassment. That belief was shattered one cold winter morning when Jack received a letter unlike any other. It was an official notice informing him that his beloved ranch had been sold at auction for unpaid dues and fines imposed by the HOA. Stunned, Jack read the document over and over, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. How could this happen? He hadn't authorized any sale, nor had he attended any auction. Yet there it was in black and white. His 15,000-acre ranch was no longer his. Determined to get answers, Jack reached out to local authorities, only to hit a wall of bureaucracy. Records showed that the HOA had somehow obtained forged documents transferring ownership of his land to themselves. From there, they'd orchestrated a secret auction, selling the property to a wealthy developer who planned to turn it into yet another cookie-cutter subdivision. Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing. Everything he held dear, his family's history, his livelihood, his identity, had been stolen out from under him, all because of greed and corruption. Devastated, but unwilling to give up, Jack decided to fight back. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The people behind the HOA were powerful, connected, and seemingly untouchable. But Jack had something they didn't: a deep-rooted connection to the land and an unshakable determination to set things right. As he sat alone in his now diminished home, staring out at the horizon where his cattle once grazed freely, Jack made a silent vow. He wouldn't let them win. Not now, not ever. Whatever it took, he would reclaim his ranch and expose the truth about the HOA's dirty dealings. Little did Jack know, This was only the beginning of a long and winding journey. What started as a personal battle would soon grow into something much bigger, drawing in neighbors, lawyers, journalists, and even state officials. The road ahead promised to be fraught with challenges, but Jack was ready. With nothing left to lose, he prepared to take on not just the HOA, but an entire system rigged against ordinary people like him. And though the odds seemed stacked impossibly high, one thing was certain. Jack Thompson was about to prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes can rise from the ashes of injustice. Jack knew he couldn't face the HOA alone. What had happened to him wasn't just unfair, it was illegal. But proving it would require more than anger or determination. It would take evidence, strategy, and someone who understood the law better than the people trying to manipulate it. With his ranch stolen and his life turned upside down, Jack made the decision to hire an investigative lawyer. His choice fell on Sarah Bennett, a sharp and tenacious attorney known for taking on cases others deemed impossible. Sarah had a reputation for digging deep, uncovering truths that others missed, and fighting tooth and nail for her clients. When Jack explained his situation to her, she listened intently, her eyes narrowing as he described the forged documents, the secret auction, and the HOA's relentless pressure. By the end of their meeting, Sarah didn't just agree to take the case. She promised Jack she'd leave no stone unturned. The investigation began quietly but intensely. Sarah started by combing through public records, searching for any trace of how the HOA had managed to sell Jack's land without his knowledge. It didn't take long for patterns to emerge. The HOA's board members, it turned out, weren't just ordinary neighbors looking out for their community. They were deeply connected to the developers buying up land in the area. One member owned a construction company, another worked for a real estate firm, and yet another served as a consultant for zoning changes. These weren't coincidences. They were deliberate connections, designed to benefit a select few at the expense of everyone else. As Sarah dug deeper, she uncovered something even more alarming. Several key signatures on the documents transferring Jack's property had been forged. Not only that, but local officials responsible for overseeing such transactions had been bribed to look the other way. What shocked Jack most, however, was learning that his case wasn't unique. During her research, Sarah discovered numerous complaints filed against the HOA by other homeowners in the area. Some had lost small parcels of land due to alleged violations of HOA rules. Others found themselves slapped with exorbitant fines for trivial issues like painting their homes the wrong color or planting trees without permission. In many cases, these fines spiraled out of control until the HOA foreclosed on the properties entirely, selling them off to developers under suspicious circumstances. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, revealing a web of corruption far larger than Jack had imagined. The HOA wasn't just targeting him. They were systematically stripping away people's rights, using legal loopholes and intimidation tactics to amass wealth and power. Armed with this information, Sarah advised Jack to file multiple lawsuits, not only against the HOA but also against the real estate agents, developers, and even the local officials involved in the scheme. This was risky business. Going after so many powerful players meant making enemies at every level. But Jack didn't hesitate. He knew that if he wanted justice, he had to strike hard and fast. The lawsuits accused the HOA of fraud, forgery, and racketeering, while also challenging the validity of the auction that had stripped him of his ranch. Filing these claims was just the beginning, though. The real battle would be fought in court, where Jack and Sarah would need to present irrefutable proof of the HOA's wrongdoing. While waiting for the legal process to unfold, Jack spent countless hours poring over documents, attending meetings with Sarah, and reaching out to other victims of the HOA's schemes. Many were hesitant to speak out, fearing retaliation or further loss. But Jack's persistence paid off. Slowly but surely, he built a network of allies, people who shared his outrage and were willing to join the fight. Together, they formed a support group, pooling resources and sharing stories to strengthen their case. These interactions gave Jack a renewed sense of purpose. He realized he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had been wronged by the same corrupt system. As the weeks turned into months, Jack became increasingly frustrated by the slow pace of the legal system. Court dates were delayed, motions were filed and refuted, and depositions dragged on endlessly. Meanwhile, the developer who had purchased Jack's ranch began moving forward with plans to bulldoze parts of the land. Trees were cut down, fences torn down, and survey markers placed throughout the property. Watching this destruction from afar broke Jack's heart. Each fallen tree felt like a personal loss, a reminder of what he stood to lose forever if justice didn't come soon. But, amidst the chaos, Jack stumbled upon a discovery that would change everything. While reviewing some paperwork provided by Sarah, he noticed something strange about the HOA's financial records. Buried within pages of mundane accounting entries was a list of names, homeowners whose properties had been sold without their full understanding or consent. At first glance, it seemed harmless enough. But when Jack cross-referenced those names with recent real estate transactions, a disturbing pattern emerged. Dozens of homes owned by HOA members had quietly changed hands, often sold to shell companies, linked to the same developers behind the HOA. In some cases, the original owners weren't even aware their homes had been sold. They continued living there, blissfully unaware that their mortgages and titles were now held by entities controlled by the very organization they trusted to protect their interests. This revelation hit Jack like a thunderbolt. The HOA wasn't just stealing land from outsiders like him. They were betraying their own members. The irony was staggering. People who had joined the HOA believing it would safeguard their investments were now victims of the same predatory practices they had supported. For Jack, this was both infuriating and enlightening. It confirmed what he had suspected all along. The HOA's actions weren't about improving the community. They were about greed, pure and simple. And if they could treat their own members this way, then no one was safe. With this new insight, Jack decided to act. He couldn't sit idly by while the HOA continued its rampage. If they thought they could play dirty, then he would show them exactly what that looked like. Sitting down with Sarah, Jack outlined a bold plan, one that would not only expose the HOA's corruption, but also turn the tables on those who had wronged him. Sarah listened carefully, nodding as Jack spoke. By the time he finished, she was smiling, a rare sight during such stressful times. "You're not just fighting back," she said. "You're rewriting the rules." And so, with a renewed sense of purpose and a carefully crafted strategy, Jack prepared to take the next step. He didn't know yet how things would unfold, but one thing was certain. The HOA had underestimated him. They had taken his land, violated his rights, and destroyed his peace. Now, it was his turn to strike back, and he intended to do so in a way that would leave them reeling. Justice might still feel distant, but Jack was determined to make sure it arrived, and when it did, it would come with a vengeance. Jack's plan was simple in theory but bold in execution. If the HOA could exploit legal loopholes to seize properties, then he would use those same loopholes to hit them where it hurt most, their own homes. It wasn't revenge for its own sake. It was a calculated move to expose the hypocrisy of an organization that claimed to protect homeowners while secretly betraying them. With Sarah's guidance, Jack began researching property laws, zoning regulations, and real estate transactions, until he became something of an expert himself. What he discovered gave him hope. Many homeowners in the HOA-controlled neighborhoods had unknowingly signed over power of attorney or other legal rights when they joined the association. These documents, buried in fine print and jargon, allowed third parties, like shell companies linked to developers, to sell their homes without their full understanding or consent. Armed with this knowledge, Jack started buying up these homes. He didn't do it recklessly. Every transaction was completely legitimate, following all the proper procedures and paperwork. The sellers, often unaware of what they were giving up, accepted offers willingly, thinking they were simply cashing out on their investments. Some were elderly residents downsizing their lives. Others were families moving away for work opportunities, and still others were people struggling financially who saw Jack's offer as a lifeline. None of them realized the deeper implications of the sale, not yet anyway. For Jack, it wasn't about punishing innocent homeowners but exposing the flawed system that had enabled such exploitation in the first place. The first few purchases went smoothly, almost too easily. Jack bought a modest ranch-style home near the edge of the subdivision, then a 2-story colonial closer to the center of the development. Each time he paid fair market value, ensuring there was no room for dispute later. Once the deals were finalized, Jack hired contractors to renovate the properties. Some he turned into rental units, advertising affordable housing options for workers and young families. Others he sold outright to new buyers outside the HOA's influence, further diluting the organization's control over the area. Slowly, but surely, Jack began inserting himself into the very fabric of the community he had once fought against. At first, the HOA didn't notice what was happening. Their focus remained on expanding their reach, pushing through zoning changes and squeezing more money out of existing members. But whispers soon spread among residents. People began asking questions. Who was this mysterious buyer snapping up so many homes? Why were familiar faces disappearing from the neighborhood? And why did eviction notices start arriving at houses where longtime owners thought they still lived? Confusion turned to panic as homeowners scrambled to understand how their properties had slipped through their fingers. Many accused the HOA of betrayal, pointing fingers and demanding answers. After all, hadn't the association promised to protect their investments? How could they let this happen? For Jack, watching the chaos unfold was both satisfying and sobering. On one hand, he felt vindicated knowing that the HOA was finally facing consequences for their actions. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the human cost of what was happening. Families were being displaced, friendships shattered, and trust eroded. It weighed heavily on him, but he reminded himself of the bigger picture. This wasn't just about his ranch anymore. It was about holding the HOA accountable for years of corruption and abuse. Still, he made a conscious effort to handle each situation with care. When tenants came knocking, confused about why they were being asked to leave, Jack explained everything clearly and offered assistance finding new places to live. He even set aside funds to help cover moving expenses for those truly in need. It wasn't much, but it was something. As word of Jack's actions spread, the HOA board grew increasingly desperate. They called emergency meetings, sent frantic emails to members, and tried to rally support against this outside threat. But their efforts only backfired. Instead of uniting the community, their panic exposed cracks in their carefully constructed facade. Longtime residents began questioning whether the HOA had ever acted in their best interests. Suspicion turned to anger when evidence surfaced linking several board members to the very developers accused of manipulating property sales. One by one, alliances crumbled, leaving the HOA scrambling to maintain any semblance of authority. Meanwhile, Jack continued his campaign, methodically acquiring more homes and destabilizing the HOA's grip on the neighborhood. His strategy wasn't just about property ownership. It was about dismantling the illusion of control the HOA had worked so hard to create. By injecting new life into neglected homes and welcoming diverse groups of people into the community, Jack was reshaping the area in ways the HOA never intended. Where once there had been uniformity and conformity, now there was variety and vibrancy. Neighbors who might have otherwise clashed found common ground in their shared frustration with the HOA. Some even reached out to Jack directly, thanking him for shining a light on the corruption they had long suspected but never been able to prove. Of course, not everyone appreciated Jack's interference. A handful of die-hard HOA supporters viewed him as a villain, accusing him of ruining their vision for a perfect community. They filed complaints, organized protests, and even attempted to block his construction projects. But their resistance only fueled Jack's resolve. Every obstacle they threw in his path gave him another opportunity to demonstrate the flaws in their system. When they tried to shut down a renovation project, citing obscure zoning violations, Jack countered with documentation proving the HOA had waived similar rules for developers in the past. When they pressured local officials to deny permits, Jack rallied public support, turning permit hearings into packed town hall meetings where residents demanded transparency and accountability. Through it all, Jack kept his ultimate goal in mind: justice. Buying homes and disrupting the HOA's plans wasn't an end in itself. It was a means to an end. Every dollar he spent, every hour he devoted to this cause, brought him closer to reclaiming his ranch and restoring balance to a broken system. Yet as he stood on the porch of one of his newly renovated properties, watching children play in the yard and neighbors chatting across fences, he realized something profound. This fight wasn't just about winning back what had been taken from him. It was about creating something better. A community built on trust, fairness, and mutual respect rather than greed and exploitation. The HOA, however, wasn't ready to give up. As Jack's influence grew, so did their desperation. Behind closed doors, board members hatched plans to discredit him, spreading rumors and filing frivolous lawsuits in an attempt to drain his resources. But Jack was prepared. With Sarah by his side, he navigated each challenge with precision and determination, turning every attack into an opportunity to strengthen his case. Public opinion shifted in his favor, bolstered by media coverage that painted him as a modern-day David taking on a corporate Goliath. Supporters rallied around him, donating money, volunteering their time, and amplifying his message online. What had started as a personal vendetta was rapidly becoming a movement, a testament to the power of standing up against injustice, no matter how daunting the odds. And yet, despite the progress he'd made, Jack knew the battle was far from over. The HOA still controlled vast swaths of land, including his beloved ranch. Legal proceedings dragged on, delayed by appeals and technicalities designed to wear him down. But Jack refused to be discouraged. Every setback only reinforced his belief that the truth would eventually prevail. In the meantime, he focused on building bridges, fostering connections, and proving that change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Little by little, he was rewriting the story of his community, transforming it from a symbol of corruption into a beacon of hope. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, Jack walked it with his head held high, knowing he was fighting not just for himself but for everyone who deserved a fair shot at the American dream. The tide began to turn in Jack's favor when the story of his fight against the HOA reached the ears of local journalists. At first, it was just a small article in the town newspaper, a brief piece highlighting how one man was standing up to what many saw as an overbearing and corrupt organization. But that little spark ignited a wildfire. Reporters from larger outlets picked up the story, intrigued by its David versus Goliath nature. Soon, interviews with Jack appeared on regional television stations, followed by features in statewide newspapers. The narrative captivated audiences. Here was an ordinary man, stripped of everything he held dear, who refused to back down and instead turned the tables on those who wronged him. As media coverage grew, so did public outrage. Residents who had once dismissed Jack as a troublemaker or outsider now saw him for what he truly was, a symbol of resistance against unchecked power. People started sharing their own stories online, recounting how the HOA had fined them unfairly, forced them into financial ruin, or even taken their homes without clear explanation. Social media played a crucial role, amplifying voices that had long been silenced. Hashtags like Justice for Jack and HOA corruption trended locally, drawing attention not only to Jack's case but also to similar scandals across the country. For the first time, the HOA found itself under intense scrutiny, not just from legal authorities but from an entire community demanding answers. The pressure mounted quickly. Local officials, initially reluctant to intervene, could no longer ignore the growing clamor for accountability. State regulators launched investigations into the HOA's practices, subpoenaing documents, interviewing members, and auditing financial records. What they uncovered confirmed much of what Jack and Sarah had already suspected: widespread corruption at every level. Board members were caught falsifying signatures, accepting bribes, and funneling money into personal accounts. Developers admitted to colluding with the HOA to acquire properties cheaply, often through deceptive means. Even some local government employees confessed to turning a blind eye in exchange for favors or kickbacks. Amidst the chaos, arrests began. One by one, key figures in the HOA's operation were taken into custody, their mugshots splashed across news headlines. The sight of these once powerful individuals being led away in handcuffs sent shockwaves through the community. Neighbors whispered about who might be next, while others celebrated openly, feeling a sense of vindication after years of living under the HOA's oppressive rule. For Jack, watching justice unfold in real time was bittersweet. On one hand, he felt relief knowing that those responsible for stealing his ranch and countless other properties were finally facing consequences. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the sadness of seeing lives ruined, friendships destroyed, and trust shattered by greed and deception. But the legal victories didn't stop there. Backed by overwhelming evidence gathered during the investigation, Jack's lawsuits against the HOA gained unstoppable momentum. In court, Sarah presented damning testimony from whistleblowers, forensic accountants, and expert witnesses, painting a picture of systemic corruption that left judges and juries alike stunned. The HOA's defense crumbled under the weight of facts unable to refute claims backed by mountains of documentation. After months of tense courtroom battles, the verdict came down. The sale of Jack's ranch was declared null and void, restoring ownership to him. Additionally, the HOA was ordered to pay millions in damages, not only to Jack but also to other victims who had joined his class action lawsuit. The decision marked a monumental victory, not just for Jack but for everyone affected by the HOA's schemes. Cheers erupted in the courtroom as the judge read the ruling, tears streaming down faces of those who had fought alongside Jack. Outside, supporters gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans in celebration. For many, it felt like a new beginning, a chance to rebuild lives torn apart by years of exploitation. As Jack stepped out of the courthouse that day, surrounded by reporters and well-wishers, he paused to take it all in. The sun shone brightly overhead, casting golden light over the crowd. It was a moment of triumph, hard-earned and long-awaited. Yet, as exhilarating as the victory was, Jack knew it wasn't the end of the road. While the legal battle had been won, the scars left behind would take time to heal. Families displaced by the HOA's actions still needed help finding stable housing. Communities fractured by distrust required effort to mend relationships, and Jack himself faced the daunting task of reclaiming his ranch, which had suffered extensive damage during the months it lay in developers' hands. Trees had been cut down, fences torn apart, and parts of the land bulldozed beyond recognition. Restoring it to its former glory would be a massive undertaking, both financially and emotionally draining. Despite these challenges, Jack remained resolute. He understood that true justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about creating something better in its place. With the settlement money awarded to him, he began laying plans for the future. Some funds went toward repairing the ranch, hiring workers to replant trees, rebuild fences, and restore natural habitats. Other portions were set aside to assist former neighbors struggling to recover from the HOA's betrayal. Jack also established a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of predatory homeowners associations and fraudulent land grabs. Through workshops, legal aid clinics, and advocacy campaigns, the nonprofit aimed to empower people to stand up for their rights and hold corrupt organizations accountable. In the meantime, Jack continued transforming the neighborhood he had reshaped through his property acquisitions. Homes he had purchased and renovated became hubs of activity, hosting community events, support groups, and educational seminars. Neighbors who had once viewed each other with suspicion now came together, united by a shared desire to rebuild and move forward. Children played freely in parks once dominated by private developers, while adults worked side by side to revitalize communal spaces. Slowly but surely, the area evolved into something far removed from the sterile, profit-driven vision the HOA had championed. Instead, it became a vibrant, diverse community built on principles of fairness, inclusivity, and mutual respect. For Jack, this transformation was the most rewarding part of his journey. Winning back his ranch was sweet, but seeing the positive impact of his efforts on others filled him with a deeper sense of fulfillment. He realized that his fight had always been about more than reclaiming lost land. It was about reclaiming humanity, restoring dignity, and proving that even in the darkest moments hope could prevail. As he stood on the porch of one of his newly restored homes watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jack reflected on how far he'd come. From the depths of despair to the heights of victory, he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to make a difference. Though the road ahead promised to be challenging, Jack walked it with confidence. The HOA's reign of terror was over, replaced by a spirit of resilience and renewal. And though scars remained, they served as reminders of the strength it took to overcome adversity. Jack knew that life would never return to the way it was. Before, all things considered, he wasn't sure he wanted it to. This new chapter, forged through struggle and sacrifice, offered something far greater, a chance to build a brighter future, not just for himself, but for everyone touched by his unwavering determination to do what was right. With his ranch restored and the HOA dismantled, Jack found himself at a crossroads. He had achieved what many thought was impossible, exposing corruption, reclaiming his land, and inspiring others to stand up against injustice. But as he looked out over his beloved property, now scarred by months of neglect and destruction, he realized that this wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. The fight had changed him. It had stripped away the quiet rancher he once was, replacing him with someone stronger, more determined, and deeply committed to making a difference. Jack knew he couldn't simply go back to the way things were before. Too much had happened, too many lives had been affected, and too many lessons had been learned. The first thing Jack did was roll up his sleeves and get to work restoring the ranch. He hired crews to replant trees, repair fences, and clear debris left behind by developers. Streams that had been polluted or diverted were carefully rehabilitated, allowing wildlife to return. Fields once trampled by heavy machinery were tilled anew, ready to support crops and livestock again. Every day brought progress, but it also reminded Jack of how fragile everything truly was. His family's legacy hadn't just survived. It had endured because he refused to give up. That realization fueled his determination to protect not only his own land, but also the rights of others who might face similar threats in the future. To honor those who had stood by him during the darkest days, Jack decided to open parts of the ranch to the community. What was once private property became a shared space where neighbors could gather for picnics, festivals, and educational programs about sustainable farming and conservation. He transformed an old barn into a community center, hosting workshops on legal rights, property management, and conflict resolution. Families came together to plant gardens, children learned about nature, and friendships blossomed in ways no one could have predicted. For Jack, these moments were priceless. They weren't just about healing wounds. They were about building bridges and fostering unity in a world often divided by greed and fear. In addition to revitalizing the ranch, Jack poured significant energy into growing his nonprofit organization. Initially funded by settlement money from the lawsuit, the nonprofit quickly gained traction as word spread about its mission to help victims of predatory HOAs and fraudulent land grabs. Volunteers poured in, eager to contribute their skills and time. Lawyers offered pro bono services, educators designed curriculum materials, and activists organized grassroots campaigns to raise awareness. Together, they created a network of support that stretched far beyond Montana, reaching communities across the country grappling with similar issues. Jack traveled extensively, speaking at conferences, town halls, and legislative hearings, sharing his story and advocating for stronger protections against corrupt organizations. One of the nonprofit's most impactful initiatives involved creating affordable housing options for families displaced by the HOA's actions. Some of the homes Jack had purchased during his campaign to destabilize the HOA were converted into low-cost rentals, providing safe and stable living arrangements for struggling residents. Others were sold at reduced rates to buyers willing to commit to maintaining the character and integrity of the neighborhood. These efforts helped breathe new life into areas that had been devastated by years of exploitation, turning them into thriving, diverse communities. Neighbors who had once felt powerless now took pride in their streets, working together to keep them clean, safe, and welcoming. Despite all his success, Jack remained humble. He never sought recognition or fame. His motivation came from a deep sense of responsibility to do what was right. Still, Accolades found him anyway. Local newspapers dubbed him the rancher who changed everything, while national magazines profiled him as a modern-day hero fighting for justice. Schools invited him to speak to students about perseverance and integrity, and civic groups honored him with awards for his contributions to the community. Each acknowledgement humbled Jack further, reminding him that his journey was bigger than any one person. It was a collective effort, made possible by the courage and resilience of countless individuals who refused to stay silent. As months turned into years, Jack's impact continued to grow. The HOA scandal sparked widespread reforms, prompting lawmakers to introduce stricter regulations governing homeowners associations and real estate transactions. Transparency measures were implemented, ensuring that documents and agreements were written in plain language and easily accessible to members. Penalties for fraud and abuse were stiffened, deterring future misconduct. While none of these changes could undo the harm already done, they offered hope for a fairer, more equitable future. On a personal level, Jack rediscovered joy in the simple pleasures of life. He spent mornings riding his horse through fields, now lush with wildflowers, afternoons teaching local kids how to care for animals, and evenings sitting by the fire under a blanket of stars. Yet even in these quiet moments, he carried with him the weight of everything he'd been through, and the knowledge that there was still work to be done. Corruption wouldn't vanish overnight, nor would the scars it left behind. But Jack believed that every small victory mattered. Every voice raised in protest added to the chorus demanding change. Looking back, Jack marveled at how far he'd come. From the despair of losing his ranch to the triumph of reclaiming it, and then some, he had emerged not just victorious but transformed. He had started as a man defending his home, but ended as a leader inspiring others to defend theirs. Along the way, he had learned invaluable lessons about resilience, community, and the power of standing up for what is right. Perhaps most importantly, he had discovered that true strength lies not in fighting alone but in uniting with others to create something better. Today, Jack's ranch stands as a testament to perseverance and possibility. Its fields are green, its streams flow freely, and its gates are always open to those seeking refuge, guidance, or inspiration. Visitors leave with more than memories. They carry with them a renewed belief in the power of ordinary people to effect extraordinary change. And though Jack knows that challenges will always exist, he faces them with the same unwavering determination that carried him through his darkest days. After all, he has seen firsthand what can happen when someone refuses to back down. Sometimes the most unlikely heroes rise from the ashes of injustice, and sometimes they change the world.